One of the areas the Dolphins were not short on spending in free agency was the backup quarterback area, but the Dolphins aren't a team that has the luxury of carrying two on the active roster. Who makes sense and at what point in the NFL draft to add a third name to the room?
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami and Substack, the NFL draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Here on the Locked On Network, today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay tuned for the Armada Player of the Week later in the show. Couple thoughts, observations here today on the show. We have some odds and ends. Will Johnson had his private workout for NFL teams. The Michigan corner has been a popular choice to be mocked to the Dolphins at pick number 13 as he's kind of slid from his consensus top 5 pick. We had a wide receiver in on a 30 visit over the weekend as teams are winding down the 30 visits. We're just about at the end of the road of when you're allowed to have prospects on facility, and then the team is going to finalize stacking its draft board and enjoy the calm before the storm, and next week's the draft. So we're going to kind of continue to explore some big and small picture conversations as it pertains to the Dolphins. I want to start Monday off right with a little bit quarterback talk, because who doesn't love talking, drafting a quarterback, and who doesn't love the discourse that comes with current Miami Dolphins starting quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. So the Dolphins are a team, I think the first thing you do is you take a step back and you look at what and how the team has approached this offseason. And there was a lot of speculation that this team was going to be playing a short-term game because of the pressure to win. But in reality, you zoom out and you look at the kinds of contracts that were given out and the kinds of players, and there's a theme of young players with maybe a specialized skill set, or guys that didn't really latch on after their rookie contracts, but guys that are in their mid-20s. Not a lot of guaranteed money, and they've really been like that in free agency the last couple years, where I think they've had one contract in the last 3 seasons where there was guaranteed money into the second year of a contract in free agency. So they're very much taking free agency in a short period of time, but obviously they have a volume of draft picks. They've not been in a hurry to plug a bunch of holes in free agency. The perception on that, I think, is in part get young guys in-house, because you want young guys to have opportunities to play, and you don't want them to be blockaded by guys that you proactively went out and signed in free agency that are in their mid to late 30s. They are playing the long game. They are operating within the long-term health of the organization in the midst of transitioning into what will be the next nucleus of team that they're going to try to build up around. Of course, they need to win to a certain degree with that in place, or else they won't be here to see it through. But with all of the assumption that they're going to empty the chamber and it's a hot seat year and they're going to spend they haven't done that. And I think that will factor into the Dolphins' strategy in the quarterback room. Obviously, Mike McDaniels had some positive words for Zach Wilson as a player that was an intentional target for the team, as a former high first-round draft choice that did not work out and then had a year in Denver and now comes to Miami. Guy who started some meaningful football games. The Dolphins have a quarterback under contract in Tagovailoa that they've had 1 season in 5 in which he's been able to stay on the field for every single game. There's been head injury concerns, and they were brought right back to the forefront in week 2 last year. And then a hip injury cost him the final 2 games of the season. So knowing that this team is not skimping on quarterback around Tua like they did last year, and how that ultimately, probably cost them a playoff spot when it's all said and done. The rest of roster is undergoing its own evolution, but the quarterback position, knowing that they're playing the long game, knowing that they are not just operating in, we have to use our assets to field a team that wins this year or else because we're not going to be here, that might be a relevant thing for the Dolphins, but it's not how they're operating with how they're attacking personnel. I think it sets the stage for the right quarterback at the right juncture potentially being added into the mix. The question is, where does that make sense? Because your expectation is that Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are probably going to go in the first 12 picks to some degree. Now, maybe Shedeur Sanders doesn't. I think the New Orleans Saints injury with Derek Carr kind of helps this further along, that Sanders, even if he doesn't go to the Giants, will probably go in the top 12. But Ward's going to be the number 1 overall pick. Sanders, I think, is a pretty good fit for how the Dolphins offense currently runs. I actually think he's probably the most tailored skill set with how he plays the game to what the Dolphins currently are. The question is, with Zach Wilson, and you think about Tyler Huntley and the names that they've brought in the last couple of times in which they've found themselves in need of bringing a quarterback, they've kind of gone after a different skill set. And it makes you wonder, how much of, if they're going to bring in additional talents, are they looking for skills that don't necessarily replicate Tagovailoa because he's such a unique player with his strengths and weaknesses? And instead, are you looking for different identifying traits? Zach's still got the poppy arm with the ability to throw from all different kinds of arm slots, but he's a better athlete. He moves. Tyler Huntley obviously moves. The downside to Tyler Huntley was he didn't really have the quick ball handling skills and release for a lot of the quick game that the Dolphins ran last year. And the timing of kind of some of the money throws wasn't necessarily a strength. So you've got 2 buckets. And really, I think for Miami, assuming the quarterbacks that are gone at 13 are going to be gone at 13, and I really wouldn't advocate for drafting a quarterback at 13 regardless, even if Shedeur Sanders was there, it wouldn't be the choice that I would make. Because if you're going to end up in an early quarterback market in sometime in the next short window, I would rather have a more robust and deeper talent pool and varying degrees of skill sets than just, hey, this guy's kind of the right-handed version stylistically of the kind of pass that you have now. Not really a great athlete, doesn't have a poppy arm, but has good accuracy, can throw with anticipation. But even Shedeur, it's kind of a trap of, he doesn't like to take losses on plays where at times you should just take the loss on the play, and there's more minus plays as a result, or where you're taking sacks and you have to showcase your toughness, and he's not the biggest guy. So, yeah, I think Sanders would make some sense with Miami, but the value at 13 for this team and where it's at and the opportunity cost, and if you're going to have new talents brought in, I would want less capped. Like the Dolphins script to win football games, they need to be able to run the ball traditionally. Tua Tagovailoa has a sufficient NFL arm, but he's got really good accuracy, really good anticipation, and the style of which he plays within the style of what the offense is called a force multiplier. But your pathway on any given week, once that's taken away, is a much more narrow scope and path to walk than some of the other offenses with quarterbacks that have more robust traits. So, again, I think you can win a lot of games in the NFL with Tua Tagovailoa as your quarterback. But if you're going to bring new blood in, I look at what they did with Tyler Huntley and what they did with Zach Wilson, and you kind of get the sense that you'd like to not be so capped in what the pathway looks like. So it kind of leaves you in this no man's land where Jackson Dart's the other name, and I think he's going to be a top 25 pick when it's all said and done. After that, I don't have anybody else graded in the first 3 rounds. So you got 2 quarterbacks that are probably going by the time the Dolphins pick. A toolsy guy that in Jackson Dart, who I wouldn't draft with one of those with that pick at 13, but I think that's the only swing of the bat that you're going to get for him. And then you got to wait till early day 3 to get some names that I like, that I think make some sense. And there's going to be some guys that go, well, potentially early on day 2. So how do those two line up? How do the traits and the resumes of the quarterbacks available, how do they line up amidst this day 2 void and potentially some early day 3 value? We're going to explore that next here on this episode of Locked on Dolphins. So make sure you guys stick with us. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with the Fire TV Stick 4K devices with no console required. Just grab your pair controller, subscribe or sign into your Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV with endless entertainment. With 4K streaming, watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribe services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. So quarterback value early on day 3. Quarterbacks that are probably going to go on day 2. Jalen Milroe got invited to Green Bay. I don't think he'll be on. I think that's a player that is another one of those you're going to get one swing of the bat at type quarterbacks, and he's going to be gone before 48 based off the fact that he got invited to the draft. Feels like he's the one that either the Giants or the Browns are going to lean into after fading quarterback at 2 and 3 overall, respectively. So that would give you 4 quarterbacks off the board before the Dolphins even pick a second time. But that's a day 2 quarterback in Jalen Milroe. I like Tyler Shuck from Louisville, but the injury history is really scary there. He's going to be 26 years old, like 7 years in college. He was originally Justin Herbert's backup early on. He played 3 years at Oregon, played 3 years at Texas Tech, 1 year at Louisville. The first year at Louisville was really the only time he's ever been able to stay healthy for an entirety of the season. I like the skill set. Yeah, big, nice arm, spins a good ball, can get outside the pocket. I could see the West Coast offense teams really liking Tyler Shuck. Do you want to get into that can of worms again, though? Like, I think there's a point and a value, and it's on day 3 in which it becomes, I think, an acceptable roll of the dice, and the risk is worth the reward with Tyler Shuck. I don't know that he's going to make it to day 3 of the draft. But I don't think you could use 98. I don't think he makes it to 98, but because he's kind of the next in line. Will Howard from Ohio State. I'd really love to get my hands on Will Howard. I'm going to be honest. I really like how he's projecting and how he carries himself and transitioning and transferring from Kansas State to Ohio State and winning the national championship this year. Is he a picturesque quarterback? No. But I think when you hear him talk and you hear him talk X's and O's, I think he's a guy that gets it. And, at Ohio State, I think he was a little Jeremiah Smith dependent. That was kind of their safety blanket there, their star freshman wide receiver that I think kind of helped the passing production get to a level that felt like a big jump from what it was at Kansas State. But it's a big, strong, tough, 6'5", 235, can run, can get outside the pocket, can use his legs, has a plus arm from an arm strength perspective, a little bit more of a modern hybrid of like a power runner type of player. The big challenge is his OC at Ohio State was Chip Kelly, who's now with the Raiders. So the Raiders, they bring in Geno Smith, they give him a new contract, but Geno Smith's an older player. do they proactively take Will Howard before you get to the point where I think it's appropriate to have the conversation for the Dolphins maybe drafting a quarterback? I'd have a hard time with buying any of the first 3 picks in this draft class being quarterback, unless there's a too good to be true value where a quarterback falls. Like if Shedeur Sanders doesn't get drafted till 48 and you drafted him at 48, I'd say, okay, I get it, right? Like this is a potential top 10 quarterback in the conversation. If he tumbles down that far and you make that pick, that value I get. I don't think it happens. And there is a world and a realm and a possibility where, Tua Tagovailoa stays healthy and plays games, and that pick becomes super redundant in that case. But you do have to protect yourself from what it looks like if there's another injury. So, of all the names that we mentioned, I think my favorite one is Will Howard. I think Kyle McCord from Syracuse is the one that is the best non-Shedeur Sanders fit within the scheme. His grade from like my 33rd team overall prospect grade to what it graded for the Dolphins scheme is the one that gets the biggest bump. He ends up being, for me, a very early day 3 grade. So if he's there at 116 or 135 and you draft a Kyle McCord at that juncture, and knowing he's a guy that has some of the same strengths and weaknesses as Tua Tagovailoa, where he's super accurate. He's got a pretty quick trigger. He gets it between the ears. He can process a lot of information, but he doesn't have a lot of outside the pocket athleticism. He doesn't have a lot of juice when he has to drive the football. And it kind of lives within the same realm. And he's had to because of the physical traits that he's had. That's how he's had to learn how to play the position. So I don't think it's a coincidence that guys that don't have big-time poppy arms and aren't plus athletes to fall back on their athleticism, more often than not, they've had to really refine the processing element of the game. I think McCord wins in the same way in that regard. I think he's got the best chance of all the names that we've mentioned, from Shuck to Howard to the big 3 at the top in Ward, Sanders, and Dart. I think McCord has the best chance to be there, and Milrose obviously in that bucket too, to be there when the Dolphins come on the board with a day 3 pick. If you don't want to go the early route, or if you want the I don't want to say the upside or the dice roll version, but there's a small school quarterback in this year's class who has some of the same similarities as far as, like, he doesn't have a big time poppy arm. So as a result, he's had to really play with some polish, but he's coming from a smaller level of competition, and he doesn't have a big time arm, but he actually can move decently well and get outside the pocket from time to time. Cam Miller from North Dakota State. If you told me that Kyle McCord win in the first 2 days, and I'm not pro draft a quarterback in round 1, 2, or 3 in this year's class, because I do think you're drafting for a guy who's a backup and a guy that's a developmental long-term roll of the dice. I don't want to spend a marquee top 100 pick on a player like that. Really, I don't. But if you get in the 4th round and you see names that you like, and then you have to go into like pick 150, 155, if you have to get into the 7th round quarterbacks, and like a Kyle McCord's not there, your names and options would include a Dillon Gabriel or a Cam Miller from North Dakota State. I think Cam's a really interesting player. He's kind of discounting Baker Mayfield for me. He doesn't have the same arm, but as far as his build and how he moves and how he can extend plays, and he's a tough dude, and he ran a lot at North Dakota State. That's my favorite day 3 pick, and he's a little under the radar. He didn't get a combine invite. Nobody's really talking about him unless you're familiar with the Bison program in North Dakota State, or he made a positive impression on you at the East-West Shrine Game, which is the All-Star event that he attended. But when you rope in opportunity cost, I like the idea of a potentially Dillon Gabriel in the 150s or Cam Miller in the 7th round more than a Kyle McCord at 116, because of the opportunity cost of the other players at positions that I would expect to still be available for the Dolphins when they pick at 14 and in the 4th round at 116. or potentially 135. So knowing that you already kind of have one dice roll on a high tools guy in the bucket, I kind of don't hate the idea of a guy that can move a little bit, a guy that's got some cerebral to his game, but maybe is a little bit more rough around the edges, and you want to see if you can catch lightning in a bottle instead of overdrafting, because it feels like overkill to have Zach Wilson brought in, and it is overkill until you hit on one of the non-premium investments, right? It's overkill until the Dolphins end up, Tua has another injury in 2 years, and you move on, and your day 3 quarterback ends up being your starter because he took and he showed growth, and then it's not overkill anymore. And now it's a credible value. So you're kind of darned if you do and darned if you don't with the quarterback stuff. But I think you have to wait, in my opinion, until probably the 5th round to feel like, hey, I think this is a worthwhile investment, unless there's a too good to be true type scenario where Shuck is there at 116 or Will Howard's there at 116 or Kyle McCord's maybe there at 135. Or if you get like Shadur Sanders there at 48 or Jackson Dart at 48 and you take him there and say, okay, like I get it. But I predictably don't think that's the world that we're going to be living in, because it is a scarce quarterback class. Now we have some odds and ends. Will Johnson worked out. We're going to talk about his workout a little bit, what it means for the Dolphins, and a 30 visit at wide receiver yesterday. That's coming your way next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. So stick with us. The Armada Player of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week we are looking at our draft prospects to pick one guy who stands apart, the guy that we believe showcased the strength and power needed to push the Dolphins forward as we look ahead to the next season. This week's Armada and clear-cut player of the week is Kyle Williams, the wide receiver from Washington State. Dolphins had him in yesterday for a 30 visit, and a lot of heavy-duty workload for Kyle Williams in the passing game, going back to when he was playing with Cam Ward. There is a lot of big plays, big explosive plays, and you want to be able to dream big and go big in your passing game. Kyle Williams is that as a big play catalyst, and if you want to dream big and go big on your next adventure, the Nissan Armada can have you go forth and conquer. And that's exactly what I think Kyle Williams could potentially do in the Dolphins as an addition to their offense. That's cool that our player of the week this week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with the NFL draft with confidence, just like you can take the all-new Nissan Armada or any of their outstanding vehicles and conquer the road ahead for you. Take the Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Kyle Williams, wide receiver, Washington State, brought in for a 30 visit. I think he's a developmental type. Probably predictably going to go in that 50 pick void between 48 and 98, if I had to predict what his draft range looks like. But good speed, 4.4, runs down the field and creates vertical separation if you're going to end up moving away from Tyreek Hill. A lot of this conversation on today's show has been about protecting yourself from Tua Tagovailoa injuries and what the world looks like if you were to have to be forced to move on from Tua Tagovailoa, and having some guys in-house that have some upside that maybe you could find your next starter proactively. And I'm not rooting for that to happen, but you have to protect yourself from all scenarios. And with the case of Tyreek Hill seems to remind us every couple months that we need to protect ourselves from life without Tyreek Hill. This is the kind of player that I think you could transplant into this offense. And, if Jalen Waddle is the player I think he's capable of being and has showcased himself to be when he's had the opportunities over the last couple of years, Kyle Williams can kind of be the new bursty explosive presence and can run a lot of the vertical stuff. It was more than 50% of his routes came on vertical plane stuff or hitches, right? So pushing, fades, and goes, working the ball down the field, and then playing off of that explosiveness to pull up and run hitches. Well, when teams respect your speed, that's the vast majority of what Kyle Williams runs and wins as a route runner, although he does run some really nice routes that break outside the numbers, some outbreaking patterns, has some good snap and explosiveness off of that. So if you're going to play him soft, he's going to command you to really respect him. If you're going to play in the contact window and try to press him, you better get hands-on, because if you don't, he will blow by you. Now, I think there's some elements of his game that I think as a route runner, he can continue to diversify. And there's a question of that offense at Washington State and how they ran their routes versus kind of the nuance and details that go into running routes in this offense, where the defender and his leverage is going to dictate your break and how many steps that you take before you make your break, or you got to be able to make a sight adjustment based off the safety rotation. Like, I think that leap for him could be a big one, but physically, I don't have a lot of questions about Kyle Williams and his ability to assimilate to an NFL offense and be an impactful player. So I think it's interesting. He's projected as a top 100 pick, and Dolphins bringing him in for a 30 visit. We know this team's hungry for more draft picks. How do you get there, right? What does that look like? And if you draft the Kyle Williams, what do we consistently perceive to be an early round target for a picks perspective for the Dolphins? Are you bypassing to make that happen? Because then it becomes a question of, okay, what kind of roster can you put together if that's where you hypothetically were to, if you were to invest in a wide receiver at 48, what's the rest of it look like? And then are you moving on from Tyreek Hill sooner rather than later? It's all really interesting stuff to me. I mean, I would take nothing off the table for the Dolphins this year. I'm sure they've had a lot of conversations. They've got a lot of different ways that they can go because of where the roster's at. And I would consider, anything on the roster is no holds bar for how they play it. And that to me is very interesting. The other one being Will Johnson, who's a popular mock draft choice for the Dolphins. He had his private workout today for teams. Didn't run. Todd McShay reported he was running in the high 4.5s. And his agility scores, his shuttle, was a 18th percentile for cornerbacks. That certainly does not hurt or help to put off the perceived slip outside the top 12 that seems to be happening with Will Johnson. So it's just a matter of, for you, does the tape trump? Now there's some durability stuff the last really 6 months. It seems like it's been a little bit of everything, with a shoulder and a toe and a hamstring. That's all kind of added up to him having to work out the week before the draft. But then the time speed isn't there, so he doesn't run a 40. Does that scare you? It's certainly, if you treat the draft process appropriately and you're looking for reasons to have red marks on resumes that eliminate players, Will Johnson's going to have a few. And it's just a question of how much does the team covet the player based off of the film of what he's been. And I could think of an example with Tua Tagovailoa. When he came through the draft process with the hip injury, it felt like the Dolphins developed eyes for this player early on in the process, and they were comfortable with whatever was going to be out there based off what he put on his resume early when he was playing. And I think Will Johnson has a lot of that same element, where I would not in the least bit be surprised if he's on the board at 13 and that's the pick that they make, despite the fact that there's now some flags with what the testing has given and the durability stuff. When somebody shows you who they are, believe them. And the Dolphins have continued to say we are not going to shy away from injury risk, although they do, to their credit, did go out and get younger. So hopefully that helps that process a little bit. But they're comfortable living and dying by the sword. So we'll see if Will Johnson does indeed make it to pick number 13 when it's all said and done. We'll find out in about 10 days. We got more Dolphins coverage coming your way. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your Monday. I'll be back to talk to you all again tomorrow.